Hello and welcome everyone uh, to the day two of the Pharma-Synergy conference. Our day today will be focused on the biosimilar industry. So very happy to be here with all of you to get started. My name is Debraj Dasgupta. I am Vice President and Global Head of Strategic Portfolio and Market Management at Biocon Biologics. I'm based out of Singapore. I'm very pleased to moderate this session with an elite group of speakers from the biosimilar industry. As you all know, biosimilars are one of the most exciting segments in our industry, which by some estimates will grow to $36 billion by 2025 from $12 billion today with a CAGR of 25%. There was last year also, as some of you know, an IQVIA report proclaiming that biosimilars are poised to save the US healthcare system over $200 billion over the next 5 years. So as we head into 2021 and beyond, there are significant questions the industry is facing for which we have no easy answers. For example, will the market be dominated by the big multinationals like the Amgens and Pfizers or newcomers from India and Korea or even China? And what about mid-sized companies with strong presence in certain markets? Is there room for everyone in this market or room for only a few players? How much will be the development cost of future biosimilars? And will topics like interchangeability and elimination of need for phase 3 trials help more biosimilar markets get to market faster at lower cost? Further, is the market going to be dominated by price wars and fierce competition among incumbent players, leading to a zero-sum game? Or will we see increasing differentiation in the form of biobetters, devices, and digital therapeutics as the market matures? To answer these questions and more, we have a great number of sessions lined up today to look at the biosimilar industry from perspectives of senior leaders within the industry. So we'll kick off the day with the session covering APAC and Europe. For APAC, I'm very pleased to welcome Radhika and Philip, who will give us a great overview of what's happening in this part of the world. Just as a few housekeeping topics before we get started, I would encourage the audience not to be an audience, but to be an active participant. So if you go to the bottom of your Zoom bar, you will see a Q&A button. And so I'll encourage all of you to use the Q&A button and raise questions. And after the first two speakers, we will have some time for Q&A where we will take some time to answer those questions. So with that, without further ado, let me introduce Radhika. Radhika is Head of Emerging Asia Alliance Markets for Viatris and will be our first presenter for the day. Right after her, we will have Philip Gautron. Philip is Senior Director, Global Business Development for Own Brands at DKSH. And as I said, after the presentations from Radhika and Philip, we will pause for a short Q&A. So with that, over to you, Radhika.
Thank you. All right, so I'm excited to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers of Pharma-Synergy to give me this opportunity to have this exciting conversation. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of learning over the next 1.5 years with all of the speakers that are lined up. I'm Radhika Bhalla. I'm based in Bangalore in India, and I'm the head of Emerging Asia Alliance Markets for Viatris. When I was thinking about what I'd like to talk about and present for today's meeting, I thought nothing better than kind of going back and jogging my memory back to 15 years ago, 1.5 decades ago, when I actually started my journey in biosimilars in the pharma industry, and reflecting on what was there then and where we are today. So if I were to start, and what I call the phase of hypothesis, 1.5 decades since the first biosimilar got approved in a major market, we've clearly come a very long way. But it's also interesting to kind of go back, jog our memories to that period of time when the market was very nascent, probably $200-300 million, around 2007, 2008. Just at the pinnacle. And you had, I remember in my first assignment, my responsibility as part of, a company that was going to play very big in the biosimilar segment was tell us how big this opportunity is. And of course, I don't remember what those estimates looked like at that point in time. But for this meeting, I actually went back and started digging into all of the reports that analysts used to put out at that point in time. And I noticed that, the estimated biosimilars play based on different levels of exuberance, based on who the analyst was. They ranged anywhere from $2 to $20 billion by 2020, many projecting $25 to $35 billion by 2020. where we are today, we can call it the stage of validation. I mean, 15 years is not a short time, and how it's played out. I was pleasantly surprised to see that it's not too off. We're pretty much at the midpoint of, the different ranges or levels of exuberance that existed. So even today, you notice many companies, based on how they make estimates. I mean, some companies still claim that 18 to $20 billion is today's biosimilars market size. I went about slicing the data based on IQVIA data, which everybody in the pharmaceutical industry banks on and depends on, coupled with a few of a few analyst reports, and I put my number at closer to $12 billion, which is about 15% of the market size of key biologics that have faced competition in the last decade. So an early indicator of what the penetration levels have also looked like. But I have more on that in the next slides. Another important aspect, I think, to note is that the US market, which typically is about 50% of the overall pharma market by value, has opened up to biosimilars only a little over 5 years ago. And that obviously means that the peak is yet to come. And this biosimilar story is definitely here to stay and here to scale. The focus of my discussion and presentation today is for what we call the emerging markets region, and specifically APAC, as Debraj said. But I think it's important to kind of reflect what has happened in the world outside of the developed markets. US, Europe, and Japan and China always take up a special corner in the pharma market. So if you keep these four markets, these four segments aside, what role has the broader emerging markets played within accelerating the momentum of biosimilar adoption? And that obviously brings us into nuances of how specific markets within the African region or the Latin American region or the APAC region have played out. And more on that in the next slides. But of course, what's dominated the last 15 years has been a conversation which continues to happen around interchangeability and substitution. And if we were to reflect again, has this really inhibited growth of biosimilars in these markets, in the emerging markets world? Probably not, because the need of the hour was access through expansion of patient base. If you look at some of the statistics, we see that biologics itself, in terms of their penetration rates, in terms of people who need those treatments, those targeted therapies, the percentage of people who are actually getting access to that in this part of the world will be very, very different from what it would be in the developed market, in the developed world. And that's obviously meant that what biosimilars has been able to do is not to come and fight the space that the innovators has had. Of course, there's been a part of that, but it's also really been about reaching out to those people and those patients who've never had access to this simply because of the barriers that have existed from an affordability standpoint. The second aspect, the awareness and perception of biosimilars, as well as the regulatory process. This has, of course, had a very diverse response across markets and regions. And some of the parameters that I've talked about here kind of link to this point. Whether it is about speed, so obviously markets that have had a certain regulatory regime whereby the dependents, they've had their own regulatory paths, many of which have been able to be shaped with the support of large players in the biosimilar space that have worked hand in hand with governments to enable them to understand the processes that have gone into development, into building these products, and enable these countries to establish the regulatory pathways for biosimilars. And early adopters of this have obviously benefited more and are obviously ahead of the curve as a result of that, because the introduction of biosimilars have been quicker there, the adoption has been higher, and hence you have HCPs and prescribers who are a lot more comfortable with biosimilars. So the response has obviously kind of been interconnected with how the regulatory paradigm has played out. Countries that have waited for SRA approvals are benefiting from biosimilars at a much, at a stage which has probably just kicked off maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Affordability, it's remained a key determinant in driving penetration. Peer expectations, coupled with how innovators have responded, have meant that again, going back to those same analyst reports, people said, of course, this is so different from the generic space. In generics, we launch at 90% discount to the innovator. Biosimilars is going to be more like 20%, 25, maybe 30%, right? But many of us who've been in this space know that discounting levels have been different from the initial expectations. And for good and bad reasons, but somewhere this has to kind of come to a space which starts making more sense. And that has also probably opened the eyes of companies, local, regional, global biosimilars players, in terms of what's that what's that right level at which point you're able to break through the affordability threshold. And we are learning from that, from the experiences in the last 10 years, in terms of how that's going to play out in the future as well. Markets, of course, continue to prove the need for tailored approaches. There was no one size fits all. And when you look at the company dynamic of companies who played a role in building this momentum of biosimilars in the last 15 years, those that have had speed in terms of first to market opportunities, having the right partners in the entire spectrum of the paradigm, right from the product development right through to commercialization, have been able to effectively use the scientific knowledge that is needed, not just for educating regulators, but also HCPs and prescribers. And finally, I think actions speak louder than words. Countries where prescribers have seen the patient experience on biosimilars, we can already see that those markets, the time frames of approving the next generation of biosimilars is going to be positively impacted by the kind of patient experience that prescribers have seen or HCPs have seen with respect to biosimilars, which has nullified a lot of the inhibitions that many people had when the story was just unfolding. So what does this mean in terms of numbers? We're talking about this part of the world, this region, what role these countries have played in deepening the biosimilar story. They've grown, based on different estimates, it's about a 4-year CAGR of 65% since 2017. And penetration rates also ranging from 20 to 30%, with some countries being, much higher and others being potentially lower. Market adoption rates, they've been, of course, fragmented, as I said already, based on the regulatory framework and approval timeframes, as well as early adopter pool. And if you look at the rate of growth of the biosimilar market in APAC specifically, relative to maybe Latin America and Africa, it's been in the range of, for APAC, maybe 37, 38%, whereas, for some of the other regions, more like 80, 85, 90, 100%. Obviously, everybody coming out of a bases which are much smaller, but still relative, from a comparison perspective, it would still be apples to apples. And possibly one reason for that could be, the slower pace of introduction of biosimilars, because many of the markets in the APAC region have opened doors to biosimilars after approvals in countries which have stringent regulatory authorities. But that said, the APAC region itself is so diverse, as we all know. It's made up of markets like you had the early adopters like Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar. Countries like these, to a certain degree, Malaysia. These countries have focused on the product itself, on a regulatory pathway that is not necessarily dependent on countries like Europe and the US. In these countries, biosimilars have been able to be launched based on a data package which is focused on, say, a clinical study happening outside of that market in a country like India. And with that early data, and which has obviously been rigorous, they have been able to make these introductions early on. Whereas countries like some of the larger markets like Thailand, Taiwan, Singapore, these countries have stated or insisted on the need for having SRA approvals before introduction. So obviously this means that the growth trajectory is going to pick up as we are seeing more approvals coming in the SRA bodies, and these countries then kind of taking pace from them. Based on estimates, these regions, these countries, they are making up about $2 billion of the, or $10 to $12 billion odd overall biosimilar market. And that's about 20%. And this proportion, incidentally, does match up to the contribution from these markets to the overall pharma market. So what does that really say? I mean, this says that these countries, which are considered the learner markets, from a biosimilars perspective, they have pretty much played out their role in terms of how the adoption has happened. They've not shied away. They've had early good experiences, and I'm going to talk about very specific markets and regions in the next slide about how how these markets have ensured that they're pretty much taking the similar space in the overall pharma market when it comes to biosimilars as well. So the drivers that have determined the extent of dent, of course, have remained speed and price. And while we may have come a long way, there are definitely still markets where there is a need for HCPs to be convinced about the concept of biosimilarity and educated about the development rigor, manufacturing processes to gain their confidence. But broadly, if you were to look at what happened, there are three parameters that have impacted how different parts of the world have accepted biosimilars. One is the nature of the market, whether it's reimbursed or non-reimbursed. In these kind of countries, example, North Africa, it's made up of a set of 5 to 6 countries which operate very differently in terms of how the government covers the population for chronic care diseases as well as life-threatening diseases like cancer. And in some of the reimbursed markets, once the product has been approved, the speed of access is important. If you're first to market, the product is there. In reimbursed markets where the product is tendered, obviously all of these inhibitions related to interchangeability, substitutability, to a certain degree, all of these elements get addressed in a similar fashion, because in these tendered markets, once the biosimilars come in and potentially won in the tender, patients from the previous year who need to continue their therapy and regimen, in some cases have been switched to the biosimilars. In other cases, obviously, it has meant that there is a whole new patient pool that is being treated. But whereas in markets with out-of-pocket expenditure, where the HCP and prescriber is making that decision for the patient based on the affordability criteria, as well as based on what kind of patient should get on to the biosimilar, that has obviously meant that maybe there has been a higher degree of trepidation in terms of not switching a patient, ensuring that it's only new patients, or in some cases making trade-offs about the kind of indications that they would want based on the indication, which kind of patient profile they would want to try the biosimilar with. So the nature of the market, in terms of reimbursed versus non-reimbursed, has played a role. Within a North African territory itself, a market like Tunisia, which is pretty much a full zero-sum game, it's a 0-1, it's a tender. Once a biosimilar has been approved, the government has pretty much wholeheartedly switched completely onto the biosimilar. Or if you look at a country like Morocco, where it's a private and a tender mix, the aspect of adoption of biosimilars has played out very differently on the tendered side of the business versus the private side of the business, where a lot more work has to happen with the prescriber and with the with the payer in terms of the education and the awareness and all of the data that needs to be presented with respect to biosimilars. Whereas if you look at a market like Egypt, again within the same region, with a private opportunity and a tender opportunity, pretty much the same story. So I'd say that's one important aspect in terms of how quickly a biosimilar has been adopted or not adopted based on the nature of the market, reimbursed, non-reimbursed. The second aspect is regulatory pathway, which I already spent some time on. Countries that have had the gumption of setting up their own pathway for biosimilars, taking cues and working hand in hand with companies who've been able to enable them, educate them, they have had better success with respect to being able to introduce these biosimilars quicker, not necessarily waiting for approvals in countries with stringent regulatory authorities. And finally, awareness. Of course, it's a chicken and egg story. Countries where number of biosimilars and hence the patient experience has been higher, the awareness levels are obviously very high, whereas countries which are still at the cusp, example in APAC, Singapore, these kind of markets, I mean, that whole process is probably just at the starting point in terms of the ability to really shape the minds of the prescribers of what biosimilars really can do for the healthcare community for a market like that. Another important aspect as I close up my presentation would be that when you look at, I already said, the US is still at the cusp. So this means, I mean, we are just still scratching the surface when it comes to the potential of biosimilars. You start seeing global institutions such as the WHO, which have traditionally always focused only on areas such as infectious diseases, disease segments which have very, very, very broad impact. They are starting, a body like the WHO starting to extend themselves in this area. We've recently heard about rituximab, trastuzumab being WHO pre-qualified. That kind of gives a sense of where we are headed, and the pace of acceleration clearly is likely to enhance. So the jury across the spectrum of panelists, it may still be out on what the future of the biosimilar market size holds. It could range from $35 to $55 billion by 2025 to 2027, with potential growth rates of 25 to 35%. APAC, which is today estimated to be anywhere between $1.5 to $2.5 billion, being home to 60% of the world's population, and with a large pool of chronic diseases like diabetes, cancer, RA, this region is, of course, going to witness probably its peak in terms of growth is yet to come for the biosimilar space. And it's, of course, going to be enhanced by the fact that many companies, that many countries in this part of the world, in the APAC region, India, South Korea, China being examples, these are leading locations for biosimilar manufacturers. So there's no way that this region can be left behind from the perspective of what it's going to do and play, and the role that it's going to play in the global biosimilar market. Companies that are seeking growth are, of course, setting their sights on opportunities in emerging markets where treatment rates are still low. I was giving an example for other markets, but here you see in China, only 20 to 25% of newly diagnosed breast cancer patients are treated with biologics, compared with 70% plus in the US. And China is still a market where there is a very high degree of reimbursement. So imagine markets, smaller markets like Myanmar, for example, which may be smaller from a market size perspective, but in terms of the population size, not small. I mean, imagine the kind of penetration or the rate of treatment levels that may be existing in these kind of markets, leaving huge scope for what biosimilars can do for access in these kind of countries. And I think the confidence built over the last decade and a half and years of patient experience across the world, it is going to impact the late adopters across the relatively smaller Asian markets. And while larger countries like Japan and China, they continue to pave the way for very specific proposals to deepen biosimilar usage and penetration. And with that, I'm going to hand over back to Debraj, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the presentations and as well as the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you. So with that, let me pass on to Philip. Philip, over to you. And then just to remind the audience, please ask questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll take questions for Radhika and Philip after Philip's presentation. Over to you, Philip.
Thanks, Debraj. Hi, everyone. So I'm Philip. I'm just talking to you from Bangkok, where is the headquarters of my company, DKSH. So today, it's the occasion for me to share with you a very, I would say, general and pragmatic approach of the biosimilar in the market where I'm working for my company. So biosimilar has been a very important topic in DKSH for the last 5 years, and we have developed a portfolio of 8 assets over the time. So I'm going to share with you all the findings and like practical advice you can have and receive in order to have a proper approach in this very diverse region. So DKSH is operating in all the markets in Asia except China and Japan. So I'm going to really focus my talk today on North Asian market like Korea and Taiwan, and then of course Southeast Asia. This region is really a two-speed region. You have developed markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Korea, where you have high level of specialty care product penetration, very structured environment in terms of public reimbursement system. You have high GDP, of course. So those are markets really already very attracted and I would say set for biosimilar arrivals and penetration. Then you have a second tier of countries. We call them emerging markets. You will see. I will show you. They are very solid structure getting on in those places, especially Thailand, Malaysia, and now Indonesia. And then you get some markets that are also, I would say, still behind in terms of biosimilar or even biologic adoption due to, I would say, finance and affordability issues, which are Vietnam and Myanmar. Philippines is trying to catch up as well. But as we have said earlier, it's a very, very big region. It's above 600 million inhabitants. So definitely this is a region very attractive because this is really nearly a greenfield market for a biosimilar company. So right now, when we focus only on Southeast Asia market, the market is above just or around $1 billion and is set to grow in the next 2 years to 1.4 billion. The biggest chunk of the products right now in Southeast Asia are, of course, first generation of biosimilar and the insulins in diabetes and like EPO product in oncology, for example. MABs are going slowly into the picture, but I will show you that still the number of product is still limited per countries. But what I have seen during the COVID crisis and what we are learning more and more day after day in managing the disease is that government in Southeast Asia are very attentive to the fact that monoclonal antibody may be discovered are also as solution to treat a bad immune response due to disease COVID-induced. So I foresee that in the next 2 years, a product like tocilizumab or that kind could really get a preference pathway and exemption or really fast registration track. In terms of numbers, so I try to add numbers from various sources. So they are, of course, the IQVIA and some other reports. So in terms of total pharma markets, you see that in the region we're talking about, Korea is the big leader, and then there's really ahead of Taiwan, and then I would say the tier 2 markets. The evolution that we can see during the COVID year shows you also how resilient the markets have been, biopharma market, I believe. What I've looked at, and which is not in the table, is that I was looking at the biosimilar evolution in 2020, and I can tell you that most of the country it's more or less neutral or positive. So whereas the other part of the pharma market has been quietly impacted, which is not a surprise, the biosimilar market have been not shrinking in 2020. So what we can see is more or less the bio market, which is biologic and biosimilar, could be estimated around 4 billion in this 4 to 5 billion in this area. And as we said earlier, the share and the penetration varies according to countries, but overall it could be something between 25 to 30% for biosimilar. So we do have right now in Southeast Asia plus the few North Asian market a total of around 1.2, 1.1 billion dollar sales for biosimilar. Okay, so in terms of adoption rate, you have, of course, a very obvious reason is the type of reimbursement system and also what we call the out-of-pocket money. So Asia is a very diverse continent for that, and you have markets like Taiwan, which is a very major market, like European markets. Everything is reimbursed, even for biologic or biosimilar. But you have countries like Philippines, where the universal healthcare system is just reimbursing between 10 to 15% of the value of the market. So if you cannot afford by yourself the product, that's becoming the main issue for the penetration of, I would say, expensive product, not only biosimilar, but others as well. So you can see here that anyway, according to the structure of each market, there are markets who are going to push to have a more monoclonal antibody biosimilar to really lower the cost of the biologic they have on their national list and tenders. But right now, still, it's going quite slowly, I would say. But I would say, for example, in most of the market in Southeast Asia, like Thailand or Malaysia, you have 7 to 8 biosimilar registered. In Philippines, you have only 3 right now, and in Indonesia, the situation was quite tense 1 year ago because they have deleted from the national reimbursement list some biosimilar due to some budget constraint and pressure. So there are some hiccups. It's growing, but yeah, the number is on the list is very still quite shrinked and small. One thing is for BD people is, of course, to know what's the feasibility to enter such market, and for companies it's very important to consider the regulatory. Here in DKSH we are a company with very big structure everywhere, so we do have the expertise for each market, but because each market has to be seen as individual. Guidelines are different. It's not like Europe or other areas where everything is homogeneous with one rules. Here it's completely I would say case by case, so that becomes very complicated to come with a regional strategy, so you have to see country by country. If we look at that slide and the first column where is there any accelerated pathway, I would say pretty much not much, but as we have said earlier, time to time on product basis, countries can decide to give a very easy way to register the product based on the clinical and data package that is provided. More or less, I would tell you, just to give you a practical idea, that registration in Asia, Southeast Asia, in those markets is for biosimilar is between 20 to 28 months. In terms of preference for local manufacturing, of course, they would like to they do have for other segment, I would say local preference for local manufacturer, but here, except Korea in the list of countries and Taiwan for 1 or 2 items, you do not have local manufacturer. So of course, all the dossier will be either European dossier, American dossier, or Indian dossier as exported to this region. Korean are gaining a little bit more market share. They are very strong in their own market, and they are getting more and more market share in countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. In terms of clinical trial requirements, here it's still in the region, it's still very tough. I know that in Europe now, the regulation tend to be a little bit loose on some biosimilar. I know that some product now only a phase 1 can be accepted. Here the agencies are pretty stringent and they still want a phase 1 and a phase 3 clinical package. So this is all the time something what we are discussing upfront with potential partners, just to tell them that of course due diligence on that part is very critical to make the assessment of the market entry correct. I'll share with you a few documentation that are needed. So in fact, when you want to register a biosimilar in the region, the dosage form, the strength has to be the exactly the same than the originator. So the countries are very nitty-gritty in that part. In terms of all what is comparison with the reference biological product, also we do have issues sometimes that a partner has comparative data with the biologic original product made in a different factory because multinational do have several sites to manufacture the biological product, and we got some setback that we need to have the exact same factory producing the original biological product for the data comparison, the exact same factory that is selling the product in the markets in Asia. So that's important. In terms of quality comparability, we need also documentation full on active substance and the finished product, not only the finished product. That's an important point. Guidelines are pretty clear in now most of the countries, especially in Hong Kong, Korea, Taiwan, and Thailand. The agencies are pretty much very efficient now. Thailand they have clearly a list of biosimilars. So if your product is not on that list, well, your product will be seen rather as a new biologic. So that's pretty clear. In terms of, and we were talking about it in the previous presentation, the adoption and the growth rate of biosimilar is of course a little bit later and still slow in that part of the region, because in fact they accept registration of biosimilar only after those biosimilar have been approved in more stringent area. Countries like Hong Kong and Taiwan, they are asking for ICH approvals. Taiwan is even asking for like a EMA centralized approval of a biosimilar plus a US approval. So it's of course take a lot of time to achieve that kind of level. That's why usually the biosimilar are launched 3-4 years I would say 3 to 4 years after launches in Europe or US. In terms of other documentation, I think it's pretty much compelling in the quality and the non-quality part, the non-clinical part, PK and so on are very I would say normal. As I mentioned, yeah, the phase 3 is still very much required, so it's not something that can be skipped easily. It needs a very, very strong justification. So far, I didn't see much success in that. Risk management plan is also very important documentation that is highly regarded in Asia. Then I want to finish with how you can see and apprehend what are the type of commercial efforts you need to have according the typology of each market. So you have markets like Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, where it's pure tender. So as we said earlier, the winner takes it all. It's a big fight on the price. Sometimes it's much lower than 50 and 60% versus the originator. You get the deal and the total quantity for 2 years. Everything is, all the passion are directed to the public hospital, so no substitution rules. So I would say that it's not very intensive in terms of field force and marketing activity. You have other markets like Thailand, Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea, and Philippines, where the tender is centralized, but hospital by hospital or province. So in fact, you have to list and manage to get into such listing one by one. So you need to have a commercial field force, key account management, very efficient to go one by one. In Taiwan, the products are reimbursed. So a biosimilar will get a reimbursement between 75 to 80%. But it doesn't mean it's a guarantee of success. It's not automatic. You have to list and I would say convince the therapeutical committee of each hospital to list your product, and then you have to gain your market share and gain your prescription. So here there is I would say on the long term more chance to maintain good price because the entry barrier is more on the market side. Usually you can have a good ROI when you are even if you are number 3, not after. But the price can be still quite good if you are in the top 3 of the biosimilar. So it's a kind of a free competition. Once you have registered at the MOH level, you need to then enlist one by one and convince a hospital or institution by institution. So it takes time. It takes a lot of effort in terms of A&P and commercial people. So that's where those market partners are requiring more margin, and they are of course asking a support from the supplier. So I think like this, I have done my presentation. I hope it was interesting to all of you, and I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you, Philip, for very interesting insights. If we can have Radhika also on video, that'll be great. Radhika, if you can come on. And yeah, so while we are waiting for questions from the audience, I have a question for both of you. So Radhika, you've covered the analyst perspectives of how the industry will shape up in APAC. And Philip, you've given us interesting perspectives from the regulatory side on what it takes to enter APAC. There are some in the biosimilar industry who feel like, just like big pharma, the biggest revenue drivers are going to be, US and Europe. But Radhika, as you've said in your presentation, 60% of the world population is in APAC. And Philip, you've also mentioned that regulatory wise, the market is opening up. And last year, the market didn't degrow compared to other segments of the industry. So what is your perspective in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you believe Asia can be as big or bigger than US and Europe in terms of revenue for biosimilars? How do you estimate APAC potential going forward?
So go ahead,
Go ahead.
Philip.
No, I mean the base is small, so to overpass, I think no. But I think for we can really count on a good CAGR of more than 20% for the next 5 to 6 years for sure. As Radhika showed, there is a lot of more needs in several in therapeutics. What I see is also some company were pushing, of course, to launch in US and Europe. In Europe, this is the price war. So a lot of companies are disappointed with their situation in terms of pricing. As I try to show in my latest slide, in Asia, you have markets where if you can stay in the top 3, and finally the erosion of price is not that much. So there is sometimes much more opportunity, smaller market, of course, but in terms of profitability, I think Southeast Asia can be a sweet spot.
Radhika?
Yeah. So interesting question, Devraj. I think it's going to be hard for biosimilars to kind of duck the overall paradigm of how pharma operates. When you look at the value of the pharma industry, fortunately or unfortunately, the US market contributes 50% of that, and followed by various other parameters. So I'm not sure whether biosimilars is going to be able to really kind of reverse that trend simply because of the nature of pricing that exists in these markets. The base of pricing for innovators in these markets is obviously going to determine what the opportunity for biosimilars players will also look like, because you're feeding off the pricing of innovators. But I think that said, and also as what Philip said, and what I was also reiterating in my presentation, I think there is the Southeast Asian region or the APAC region is really, really far from the peak right now, because there are still markets which haven't seen all of the introductions yet, which other regions in the world have had the benefit to see. So there is a lot to come. There is, in terms of the ability to make an impact from an access perspective. Obviously, there is a lot more from a patient perspective. But in terms of overall value, whether we are going to be able to beat the developed markets, maybe not. But it continues to remain highly, highly attractive as for any company that has that has an aspiration to be a global biosimilar player. I don't believe this is a region that can be missed. It's a region that's going to play a very important role, both from a perspective of how many patients you can reach out to, how many disease segments you can impact, as well as of course growth, which is going to come from this part of the world.
Thank you, Radhika. Maybe one more question for you, Philip. You spoke about in your presentation that universal healthcare is now coming to various parts of Southeast Asia. If you look at 2021, and the fact that governments have to allocate healthcare budgets towards COVID, procuring COVID vaccines, administering COVID vaccines to the population, etc. Do you see that there is a bigger opportunity for biosimilars in 2021 compared to the previous years, given that so much of the healthcare budget is going for COVID?
Yes, still, because for 2 reasons. First of all, some of the markets, some of the MOH, they have biologic on their list. And with the price of the biological original, they will see that maybe it's really worth right now to switch to the biosimilar. So they're going to use that opportunity to make some saving. The second is, as I told you, some country, and I read articles around the Southeast Asian region and the country I know well, Thailand. They are really looking at also some new monoclonal antibodies which have shown really a promising result in the management of the inflammatory disease COVID-induced. So they are definitely very interested to accelerate, I think, this year and next year, because I think the pandemic will be still around the corner next year again, unfortunately. They would be interested to accelerate the entry of such product. I've been myself, because they know we do have products for Thailand lining up. I've been myself receive a call if I got tocilizumab, which I don't. So in fact, it shows that definitely officials are really looking at introducing maybe more biosimilar due also to that reason.
Great, very interesting. Anything to add, Radhika?
No, I think he said it all.
Okay. No, so thank you both a lot. It was a very interesting set of presentations. I think it was very clear that APAC in general is a very hot market for biosimilars, and I hope there were a lot of learnings for the audience to take away. So thank you both for making the time and being here today to present.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. With that, we'll move westwards to Europe. And I have now the pleasure of introducing our two speakers for Europe. So first up will be Carlos Berardi. Carlos is Head of Licensing and Business Development Director for Kern Pharma. And he's going to talk about biosimilar industry in Europe, particularly looking at market access and sustainability of the system versus the business and the portfolio strategy that needs to be undertaken. Following Carlos, we'll have a presentation from Jose Ignacio Diaz. Jose is General Manager, Head of Commercial Operations for Emerge Pharma. And then, as we did in the previous session, following the presentation from Carlos and Jose, we'll open up for Q&A. So we'll ask the audience to ask any questions that they may have. So Ignacio, you're ready? Then you can go first.
No problem. Sure, of course. I have a very clear idea about what is well, this is more or less the summary of the presentation that I will address today in these 15 minutes. The tender business in Europe for biosimilars with a specific point in the lessons from the past. And after that, I will try to discuss the biosimilars in the future. What are the differences between the first, second, and the third wave? And what we think is quite important is one important lesson from the past is that probably only the patent expiration and market potential is not enough to decide which biosimilar should be developed. So coming to the first question, I always start with this in my articles. The problem with biosimilars, there are really a key tool for sustainability of the system. If you think about it, just only the 10 top products launched in 2019 are expected to have sales about $20 billion into 2024. For example, in Germany, just put in an example, 37% of the growth in values is coming from biologic products in the oncology market. That is unsustainable unless we can generate some kind of savings. And of course, biosimilars are one of the tools, as it was in generics during the crisis of Lehman Brothers especially. But one important thing here is talking about the sustainability for the biosimilars marketplace. This is a very famous slide from Cubaya. We have to think not only in the patient, but the physician, but the healthcare budgets, but also the companies that are supposed to be developing the products. And at the moment, they are facing a very challenging environment where it's not clear what is the commercial system that could be manageable in the mid-term and long-term. Previously, somebody pointed that what happens with what kind of players could succeed here? Only the big companies, only the new comers, the bioemergents, or there is path for other companies. That's something that has to be addressed depending on how is the system that we want to deal with. So in Europe, of course, most of the products that are really relevant in terms of the budget, meaning those that are, let's say, blockbusters and are past to the patent expiration, they will face a tender process. But again, the tender is not always a solution unless we get it in a way where it's sustainable. It has to be transparent. have to get no advantage for the incumbent supplier, and must ensure the needs are provided at the requested cost, quality, and quantities. That is not always the case. For example, there is a big question here is what about the value-added services? Should be considered in the tenders process. At the moment, there are, as we will see later, different ways to see it in Europe. Of course, it could provide more therapeutic options for the doctors and patients, and could generate improvement in all the value chain. However, we have to think that what is the purpose of the biosimilars for example, the payers. They want to reduce the prices as fast and deeply as possible. So for them, added value services reduce standardization, introduce a complexity in the process, and could generate the lack of transparency. So maybe the prices at the end are not going to be so dramatic and so drastic as expected. Well, if we go to the specific examples, we see that in some cases in France and Ireland, for example, in specific cases, they are using point-based weighting systems, or even in the case of Ireland, measurement that contributed even to 15% of the overall weighting. But there are very specific cases. To be honest, it's not the general way. There are some recommendations that value-added services should be included, but at the moment, they are just recommendations. So we cannot say that they are affecting let's say the 90% of the tenders in Europe. To be honest, I think based on the experiences that the most important guideline is always the price. And well, regarding the processes, we have seen a lot of changes lately. We don't know, for example, what's going to happen with the new NICE guideline regarding the not use of phase 3 or no need to phase 3 regulatory data. It seems that we are moving to a more, try to make it as flexible as possible, the process to switch to biosimilars. Again, price. Of course, the impact of tenders in the adoption of biosimilars is quite huge, as we can see in Denmark, France, but I think in all the markets, impact of the let's say the incorporation of tenders to the adoption is quite high, especially when they are hospital driven. So in general, we can say that the tenders have a big impact in the adoption of biosimilars. They have a big impact in the decrease of the prices, and this is what I wanted to point out here. Every day more governments are taking it as a system where the winners takes all option is the alternative that generates is faster and deeper saving in the system. However, it has to be considered if this approach is sustainable in the time for the companies. Well, we have, for example, the case of Humira. We have, for example, more than 31 companies developed biosimilars of adalimumab in a tender-driven market where, let's say, price is going to be maybe the single or one of the unique reasons to select the market. How many of them will really reach the market? If we consider that the cost of developing a biosimilar could be estimated around 100 million euros, how many millions of euros have been wasted on the development of products that probably are not going to reach the market? So I think this is something that we have to take into consideration when we think about the future. What happened in the first wave, what happened from 2006 to 2019, should give us some clues about what should be done in the future in order to make better the decisions in terms of the selection of new biosimilars. Of course, the valid use services should play an important part in the sustainability of the biosimilars market. However, have to be defined. At the moment, there is not a real way or a real standard way from a global European perspective. And probably this should be one of the ways that we should work on. And finally, single winner tenders are very effective and reduce the prices as it was in generics in the past. But however, it limits the possibilities for middle-sized companies to resist in the long term this kind of approach. So what is the future for biosimilars? Well, again, the opportunities are clear, increasing demand, the payers are actively promoting adoption. It's true that the doctors are losing all their specific, the previous concern about the use of biosimilars. There are much more biologists losing patent. The authorities are, of course, because they need it, trying to get less litigations. So we cannot expect so many Humira cases like in the past. Biosimilars have been included in protocols for use. Of course, tenders are there. And the switch at all levels will be probably promoted in the future. What are the threats? Of course, the payers' pressure on price, the nocebo effect. We have to remember here that for most of the European markets, patients are treated with a biological or with a biosimilar. So biosimilar for them is not a personal advantage of any kind. So that means that if, for example, insulin users are forced to move to another product after maybe 10, 20 years using the same device, any kind of bad effect linked to this, maybe casual or maybe just not related, but they will immediately connect both things. Of course, there are going to be some kind of price wars. Another important thing is the development platforms that they were not very important in the past, but at the moment they are driving to manufacturing competitive advantages that could be explored in the future, especially in products where we are just coming to the low price, low margin place. It's also be possible that there will be generated some kind of API oligopolies or bio API oligopolies that through a vertical integration can drive to a much better or a competitive advantage in terms of pricing. Of course, the winners take all markets as discussed. And this is something important, is the bioemerging for some companies coming from Korea, China, or India. The biosimilar development is just a step to the development of another biological R&D. So it could be they can accept some kind of shorter losses to gain experience in the R&D business. Okay, this has happened in the past in the generics when the number of competitors grow more than 3, 6, 7, 10. The prices will be always compromised. So, and they are like, let's say, like red lines, and I would say like yellow lines, depending on the cases. It has to be considered when deciding what the product to develop. Okay, so we should be in the profitability with dimensioned share of voice part. Of course, the optimal part is also possible, but then the identification of the right candidates could be absolutely mandatory. As discussed before, and you know, everybody knows that the biosimilar scheme is between the innovative and the generics. The problem is that the investment is, of course, less than in the case of an innovative product. But for example, in the case of generics, with a really limited cost of development, you can develop 100 generics, and even if only 30 are reasonably well established in the market, can be enough. But in the case of biosimilars, you cannot develop 100 biosimilars. So the risk is, or the possibility to use, let's say, diversification ways to reduce the risks or for risk management is quite less than in the case of generics. So in which part we are, in the red one or the green one, is going to make a big difference for companies, especially for those companies that are really committed with biosimilars and really have, let's say, high risk in this part of the business. Coming to the differences between the first wave and the second and third wave, The first wave was mostly oncology and autoimmune products, while in the case of the new products, we are as we see here, we see from diabetes, we have ophthalmics, we have blood products, transplant products, derma, antivirals, cardio, rare disease. Of course, we are talking about all the products that could be, let's say, feasible for the development of a biosimilar, because the patent is expiring in this, let's say, 5 to 7 years time. So, of course, the first wave, it was more or less all clear. The therapeutic areas were crowded. The products were highly, let's say, demanded. So it was, the strategy to some point was much more clear than it is at the moment. Here, probably there is much more a path for specialists. Even there are some kind of orphan drugs that could be also bio-orphan drugs that could be also considered as maybe potential ways or potential opportunities. Comparing, for example, the first wave with the second wave from 2006 to 2025, and you see that the number of candidates is much higher, it's nearly double, it's more than double, sorry. Then the total sales in 2018, for example, in the first wave were around 70 billion US dollars, while in 2018, the same products for the second wave were 75 billion. So they are expecting to have around 100 billion US dollars as at the peak sales. So it's a, let's say, 50% higher market opportunity in terms of the global. If we go to those that are going to be expected to be blockbusters, some of them are not there, but will be at the time of the peak sales or the patent expiration, sorry. We have like 3 groups. We have 5 molecules with around 7 billion sales or more, with, of course, high probability of a significant number of biosimilars, where maybe the Humira case can be duplicated. So that has to be taken with some care, because probably the number of competitors here will be high. Then we have 11 molecules that have around 3 billion sales and billion US dollar sales. That probably this is the place where a good allocation of resources to identify the most promising molecules should be more effective. And finally, we have 15 molecules with 1.7 billion US dollars on average that are probably also a very good opportunity, because not everybody will try to develop biosimilars here. So with a good identification of these molecules could probably drive to better outcomes, better profit than in other groups. And well, our company, BioPharma-Links, we have been developing a different way to select biosimilar candidates that are considering all the value chain cycle, from the API supply. Don't forget about more than 50-60% of the total API and bio API is coming from China. This can be in the future a problem in case, for example, the prices of the APIs or the supply of APIs is an issue. The technology platform processes are changing quite strongly. For sure, the scaling, the quality, the registration, the production, the distribution, the access to market, the commercialization and follow-up have to be considered, all of them, in terms of deciding which candidates are the best position in our specific company capabilities. So technical complexity, product development optimization, API supply, risk for patients in clinical developments. Okay, this one is probably going to be limited if finally the phase 3 are going to be reduced. Sustainability of the paradigm. Sometimes we don't forget that new products are coming, and when we review a product, maybe in a couple of years, that's when it will come to the market. The paradigm can have changed. Of course, the conversion rate. I mean, the switching and the adoption curve. The patient acceptance, what is important in the cases, for example, in insulins or products where the device is important. Sometimes the patients are not going to be so happy with the changes. The competition, of course, and for sure, and this is an internal strategy, the competition synergies and the company strategy. For example, some Indian companies are quite well established in Europe. So for them to bring new biosimilars to the market is not going to increase their sales structure. and therefore the cost of the commercial costs are going to be quite limited, or impact in the commercial cost will be quite limited in comparison with companies that probably have only 1 or 2 biosimilars in the market. So in summary, it's a fast-growing segment with interesting opportunities, but the return on investment have to be ensured with the right strategy. So appropriate selection of biosimilars is a key factor. Of course, not size and patent status should be the only things to consider. The dynamics are quite important. So continuous tracking of the market. The pure sales-based quantitative analysis is not enough because, again, we have to discuss what is the commercial strategy that makes sense, etc. Of course, tender tracking, regulatory and real-life practices in hospitals to understand how the trends are moving, because it's an evolving market. It's quite important to understand what is the adoption curve that we can expect now and in the future. And the most important, in my opinion, is that the commercial structure should be tailored to the real situation and should be flexible enough to change if the environment does. For example, if finally the switching at pharmacy level is going to happen in most of the European markets, probably the commercial approach should change, and the companies that wants to be active here should be aware of that. And that was all. Thank you, and I hope this will be helpful for you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Thank you. Please stay on also later on for questions. So now let's hand over to Carlos, and then after Carlos's presentation, we can take some questions.
Okay, hello again, and well, thanks for joining, and thanks also to Pharma-Synergy and BioPharma-Synergy to organize this nice event despite the difficult situation. After Ignacio's general overview of the biosimilars in Europe, I would like to give a bit more specific and practical point of view of the biosimilars in Spain and Portugal. So in that respect, let me start with a brief presentation of my company to understand the role that we play in the Spanish and Portuguese market in biosimilars. So Pharma belongs to a bigger group, the group Inducern, that is a multinational family owned with 3 main companies. Focusing on Pharma, the company was established in 1999, and we have our offices in Terrassa, in the region of Barcelona. These are some interesting figures, but it's important to mention that we are basically a generic drugs company in both retail and hospital. With these main business units, generics, as I said, also we have an important position in consumer healthcare. And since 2015, we have a new line that is Pharma Biologics, and that I will be focusing on. So Ignacio mentioned that it is very important to have flexible commercial structures. And in this respect, it is significant that until 2014, Pharma didn't have any experience in biosimilars, but we managed to create a specific commercial structure for biosimilars because we reached a strategic partnership agreement with the Korean company Celltrion that you probably know, in order to create a whole line of biosimilars, in our case monoclonal antibodies, and with great success so far. So our position, as I said before, or our role, we are distributors of these products from Celltrion, and that I will be presenting now. Okay, these are the 3 monoclonal antibodies that we have in the market. The first one was infliximab, called Remsima, launched in 2015. After that, we launched Truxima, that is a biosimilar of rituximab, and the last one was Erzuma, that is a biosimilar of trastuzumab. So I will be starting, well, these are some highlights of our biologics business unit, okay, that I will further explain. So I would like to start with an overview of the market access to biosimilars in Europe. In the European Union, there are different tools to drive and to promote the biosimilar adoption. Of course, we have tenders, we have also discount agreements, we have different national guidelines on prescribing biosimilars. Some countries also have incentives for physicians in order to prescribe biosimilars. There are also tools for monitoring the adherence to the prescribing of biosimilars. And in general, the substitution at pharmacy level is not allowed, but the prescribers can switch products to biosimilars, always with patient consent. If we focus on the situation in Spain and Portugal, what we have is, apart from the variety between the different countries in Europe, in Spain we have significant differences between regions. So we have multiple regional tenders and even tenders at hospital level. So it is crucial to understand well, how the market works, and it is very important to have good knowledge of this market and good relationships with these regional authorities and even hospitals. It is also important to mention that the uptake of biosimilars is usually driven by the budget of these hospitals. Of course, this model may change in the future, and it is expected that these let's say specific tenders will move to a larger institutional tenders. But so far the situation is, as I said, very, very diverse. So as in our case, from Kern Pharma's experience, our distributor role have to take into consideration, or we have to offer some added value services. And this added value can be wide, but I would mention that it is crucial to have a good supply chain to be reliable. It is important to have pharmacovigilance support, and especially it's important to have different initiatives regarding support to patients and also with health professionals. In this respect, from Kern Pharma Biologics in the past, and we continue doing different initiatives. For example, to mention some of them, support for patients with breast cancer, or for example lymphoma non-Hodgkin, and in terms of information and training for healthcare professionals, we've done different initiatives, from clinical cases, courses, different training, as I said, that can be seminars, podcasts, a lot of online networking, with the aim of raise the level of awareness among physicians and patients of biosimilars. If we look at the penetration or the adoption of biosimilars in Spain, you can see that especially in the last 3-4 years, and the last launches of biosimilars have a rapid increase in the market share. You can see, for example, infliximab, trastuzumab, or adalimumab, with a very high growth in the adoption. In any case, we will see each one of these products. As I mentioned before, we have at the moment 3 biosimilars, 3 monoclonal antibodies. The first one was infliximab, launched in 2015, and this is the market right now, well, in the last data from 2020, and you can see that the innovator, Remicade, in this case, has 28% of the market, whereas biosimilars, including Pharma's Remsima, have a total of 72% market share. In the case of rituximab, we have a similar photo. We have the innovator from Roche, Mabthera, with a bit more than 30% market share, and two main players that are Rixathon from Sandoz and Truxima from Pharma, meaning that these biosimilars represent the 68% of the market share. And the last one of the product that we have on the market is trastuzumab. In this case, Herceptin still keep the biggest market share with 44%, more or less, and the biosimilars represent about 56% of the market share. So, as some first conclusions regarding the market access, I would say that it is clear that biosimilar adoption is increasing every year. The prescribers, the first barrier that they may have at the beginning, I think, is not anymore, and they feel confident about prescribing biosimilars. Also, I would say that our experience as distributors is that it is crucial, it is very important to have a good market knowledge, and also, as I mentioned before, relationships with hospitals and regional entities to have a good market access. I would also highlight the importance of giving some added value to both professionals and patients. Of course, being first on the market, that was the case for Pharma in infliximab and rituximab, is a great advantage. But we are seeing that late entry players can also get access to the market, but as we will see later, the access is via very, very high discounts in the tenders. So the question, as also Ignacio mentioned in his presentation, is that is this model sustainable over time? And last but not least, that in Europe there is no consensus on the maximum number of players of biosimilars that can compete in the market. So moving on to the sustainability topic, my question is, okay, yeah, I think we all agree, and there's a general consensus about biosimilars' contribution to sustainability of the health system. That's a fact. You can see some figures on the table. In this case, is savings for the Spanish national system provided by each one of the mentioned biosimilars. It is clear that biosimilars provide access to treatments, more affordable treatments to patients, and have a positive impact on the budgets of the public health systems. You can see the figures in Spain in 2020. This savings is estimated in 872 million, and in 3 years, the figure increases dramatically. But the question, as I said before, is this sustainable? And just to give you an example of one of the monoclonal antibodies that we have on the market, you can see the price evolution versus the opposite evolution of the discounts in tenders. So you can see in the first 1-2 years after the entry of the biosimilars, a logical and normal price reduction is produced. This is what I call a healthy price adjustment that can be about 50% in these first 2 years. After that, and as the number of players increases, the price continue to go down up to 70%, even 80%. But we can see that when in this case the last of the players go in, the only tool to get access to this market is with very aggressive discounts. So we have price erosion up to 90% or even more. So this is what I call like artificial or not sustainable price war. And I would like to, well, in this point to say a warning, because yeah, we have tender prices that are in the cost of goods threshold. So this may lead to some players or many players to quit the business and avoid the entrance of new players, of course, with possible undesirable consequences as the oligopoly that also Ignacio mentioned, service deterioration, and even, who knows, price increase in the long term. So this is why I think we have to take into consideration both aspects, both system and business sustainability, and find a balance between the two, considering also the value added services in the different models, not only price driven, because price driven models can be, in my opinion, least risky in the long run. And yeah, this lack of balanced competition also can have a negative impact on the social health systems in terms of supply, services, and even prices. So how can we, the different players, can we face this reality? Well, we have to be, as also Ignacio mentioned, very careful in the selection of the portfolio, and try to look for differentiation. And the differentiation can be achieved via bio innovation and with BioBetters. Probably you know the different strategies for this bio innovation. Can be through reformulation. For example, I mentioned here the formulation with citrate-free products. We can innovate with different routes of administration. For example, we can improve the devices, and we can also try to offer different strengths or concentrations in order to be different to the rest, and to avoid what I mentioned before, this war of prices, and to focus more on the patient and the health system benefits. In this respect, I am very glad to announce that today, Care Pharma is launching into the market the first subcutaneous version of infliximab called Remsima. So yeah, we are really excited with this new launch. And just to sum up some final thoughts and conclusions, we see that the biologic and biosimilars market continue to grow. So this offers a great opportunity to make healthcare savings. So that's good news. It is also good news that in the upcoming years, in the next 10 years, twice as many products will lose the protection. The patents will be expiring for many biological products. So we have a great opportunity there. But sorry. So I would say that it is possible to keep on increasing the total savings to the health system without the need of additional price erosion that, as we saw before, is really high in some cases. So what the way that I see is to increase biosimilars market share and biosimilars penetration adoption, because you can see in the figures that so far the biosimilars only represent 1.5% of the total pharmaceutical expense in the European Union. And to finalize, I would say that in order to take the most of the biosimilars in terms of savings and benefits to the patients, it is mandatory to find this balance between competition, prices, tender models, and also selection criteria. So we can hopefully find this balance between system and business sustainability. So thank you very much, and I think that's all from my side.
Thank you very much, Carlos. So yeah, let's basically see if there are questions. We don't have. Let me see if there is a question. Yes, there is a question from Javier. Let me read it out. It's a question for you, Carlos. So the question is, biobetters are like added value generics for small molecules. Why do you think payers will pay a higher price for these when the added value is usually not recognized unless having a therapeutic added value? One benefit could get the highest share, but still at a low price.
Yes, I would say that there can be some similarities between added value generics and biobetters. And yeah, I think it's a very good point to say that the price must reflect this innovation and this effort in order to offer this added value. In many cases, we see in the generics that this is not the case, because the price, the different systems of pricing in the countries many times don't offer a higher price for these added value generics. And in the biobetters can happen the same. For example, in the case of infliximab subcutaneous that I mentioned before, we've been, I would say, struggling with the health authorities from Spain and Portugal to get well a good price, not at the same level to the intravenous infliximab, associated with the benefits for the patients, and also in this pandemic situation, also for the health system, because you have a route of administration that doesn't necessarily required for the patient to go to the hospital that are saturated at the moment. So this is a very interesting debate, and hopefully the people that regulate the prices can appreciate and put value on this innovation, because definitely it is there.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And Carlos, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that you are now launching the sub-Q of infliximab. So we'll see how the market responds, and good luck to you and the team for making it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, we are right on time. So thank you to both Ignacio and Carlos for this session, and we can close now the APAC and Europe session.